Welcome to the February meeting of the Safety Committee. Do we have any public speakers, Mr. Mayor?
No, sir, we have no public speakers.
We have approval of the minutes. Motion to approve. Second. Any comments or questions regarding the minutes? All in favor? Aye. Safety work plan. David?
There are no changes to the work plan, sir.
The effectiveness of training?
Yes, in January at our last meeting, Mr. Pally asked a question that was a fairly simple question. How do you know if your training is effective? And we had been talking in the context of safety metrics, and I gave an answer that wasn't really very complete, and we wanted to give an opportunity for some of the agencies and the safety leads here to talk a little bit about how they measure and how they judge the effectiveness of their training. So I think Lori Ebbighausen from Long Island Railroad is going to start with a few comments.
Good morning. So I've had the pleasure of working, I had the pleasure of working in the training department at Long Island Railroad for 14 years prior to coming over to safety. So from both the Metro North and the Long Island Railroad perspective, we're heavily regulated, as you know, by the Federal Railroad Administration. Embedded within the FRA regulations are a lot of training metrics and standards that we have to adhere to. So we touched on a little bit about the testing that's done at the end of a training program that folks, the traditional pencil and paper or CBT type measures that are used. But the FRA also requires us to have an observation and testing program. We have to file that program with the FRA, and what that does is requires us to actually engage with our employees in the field to ascertain that they are indeed practicing what they learned in the training program, and that loops back either that, from our observations and our testing, either we make modifications to the training program or we know that we have to work with a particular individual employee a little more. In addition to that, the FRA recently passed a regulation that goes into effect January 1st, 2018, a minimum training standards regulation. The minimum training standard regulation actually requires railroads to have on file lesson plans, as well as doing an annual report on their safety incidents and their observations and testing, and how we're using those observations, testings, and incidents to inform our training programs to make sure that our training programs are indeed producing the results that are required in order to ensure a safe and efficient operation. So that's just a little background or context from an FRA-regulated railroad perspective on how we ensure that our training is effective.
And obviously the railroads aren't alone in doing that. Steve Vidal has worked very, very hard with buses and improving the training programs and training activities there. He couldn't be with us this morning, but Linda Fernandez is here in his stead.
The Department of Buses instituted a random observation program in 2015 to further enhance existing safety initiatives. One of the key points of the program is to constructive safety conversations are held at the completion of each of the observation rides. Any infractions that are observed are incorporated in the safety training curriculum, which is delivered at the training center. Discussions of these infractions serve as a valuable training tool for all our bus operators. The Department of Buses is also evaluating these observation rides, data, and comparing it to the bus operators who have attended the ION Safety Vision program. Trends are currently being identified to help enhance and give further credibility to the curriculum. This is just still in the preliminary stages on behalf of the Department of Buses.
I don't know if there are any questions from board members or any other comments from safety leads that might want to.
It's the same question we face in public education with regard to teacher evaluation. How do you know that the person you're training is actually implementing what you're training? And because training is only as good as the implementation of it afterward. The classroom is one thing. The afterward aspect of it is the most important thing. So I'm very pleased to hear that we have a series of activities that ensure that it happens. I'm sure Vinny has been through, you go through simulators, but a simulator, you're in a simulator in that regard. You need to see how someone takes it into account in the real world, for lack of a better term. And knowing that we're doing that, I think, is a very good aspect of the entire program, because it does show that we want to make sure that the amount of time and money we're putting into it is actually working. And that's more than just the safety report each month. There's more to it than that, in that regard. So I'm very pleased with that. Thank you.
Hey, Mitch.
Yes.
Wow, this is very loud. For a change. Okay. Just want to add to Linda's comments on the buses side. Chairman Prendergast, supported us in making some really robust investments in terms of safety in the last several years. And as she speaks about the observation ride program, something that we always had, we sort of enhanced it and became a little more strategic. And using that cadre of resources to focus on bus operators' behaviors and in terms of looking for variances from what we've taught them is sort of a leading activity, and not just waiting for that lagging outcome of an accident. So that's been the focus over the last year or so that Linda's referring to. And so when we see issues, that sort of gives us an indication whether the training was effective or was the student learning. And then we do, refresher training, lots of training. And like the railroads, buses is heavily regulated under the 19A law, okay?
Sure. Ready?
Mr. Pally mentioned the discussion we're going to continue to have about metrics. I'm curious about something, and maybe I'll suggest a metric, because I looked through this, and I'm wondering if we're comparing any of the steps that we're taking on safety to, for example, workers' compensation claims. Why do I mention that? Because we're going to spend over $130 million that's got to come from somewhere to go to East Side Access. Are we looking at that? Are we comparing it? Are we checking the efficacy of this program against something like that?
Employee injuries, I guess, but go ahead, any?
Yeah, you'll be, one of the things we have always tracked is employee lost time accident rate. So any of those, all of those accidents would be workers' comp incidents. So if we're targeting that area, we would be targeting that. And I wanted to add something, too, regarding training. On the rail side, our critical training, for example, is track safety and flagging for roadway worker protection. And we have a robust audit program to make sure that the individuals that go through that training, although they're tested at the end of the training, we have a robust audit program out in the field to make sure that they're following those rules, regulations, and the things that they learned. If we do see that they're not following a particular thing, there's a trend that we find, we can change the training to address that. So that is one you'll see that I'm going to be tracking, which is our audit program on roadway worker protection.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Allow me to press the point then. I understand that. I still don't see a direct link that's reportable here on workers' comp claims, other than to say they're all workers' comp claims. Well, fine. Then why are we spending over $138 million on East Side Access, for example, on increasing workers' comp coverage?
I think the focus there would be more the intense review that Transit has already started on the workers' comp side, taking a look at the individual claims that are being filed, how they're being processed, and what information we can glean from them with respect to history, frequency of nature of injury, and things like that. How we marry up or match up the two efforts, I think, is probably where you're talking about, because ideally, and we're going to get into the discussion on the indicators, remember the famous commercial, search of breath mint, search of candy mint, and the answer was yes. Is it lagging indicators? Is it leading indicators? The answer is yes. You need to have both of them. So, this dates, I'm going to date myself when I say this, but I know, for example, when I was general manager of the Staten Island division, when we took a look, because we all thought we had a pretty good training program on the bus operator side, when you took a look over the 20 or 30-year history of a bus operator, after they go through the initial training, there's the burn-in of them just learning how to drive and doing everything, and there may be some incident history that occurs there. But once they get past that, and that's generally 6 months, they'd go about 12 years with a real good record, and then a certain percentage of them would fall off the table. They'd be bad again. And it was, I think we found that, they weren't given refresher training, and they weren't reinforcing some of the basic tenets of what would be good bus operators. The other hole that I'd identified was we probably weren't in the same place as we are today with respect to announced and uniformed versus unannounced and non-uniformed ride checks. Because you need both, but if you actually can't observe somebody in service to see if their behavior is what it's supposed to be, you wouldn't really know. And I know on the rail side, after the bad accident we had at 14th Street in 1991, we instituted a very aggressive ride check program, non-uniformed and uniform with trained service supervisors. But I'm not sure where you're at now across the agencies with that. But I wanted to just spend just a second in terms of both announced and unannounced, uniformed and non-uniformed checks.
Mr. Chairman, on the point of bringing to the Safety Committee correlation between workers' comp incidences and our overall safety program, that's something that I think would be of interest, and be happy to work with David on looking where in the work plan that might fit in.
And I would just add to that, historically, and I think it's still an ongoing practice, the claims departments, as they're following up and managing those workers' comp or FELA claims, they work very closely with the safety departments to ensure that any issues that are arising or trends that they're seeing are being addressed at that level on a preventative basis as well. So it doesn't go unnoticed, and they do work together.
As far as the announced and the unannounced, the observed, we have covert and overt observations, and that's part of our program for, again, FRA regulatory compliance, but it's also just good practice. So for our locomotive engineers, under the 240 regulations, we're required to do a certain number of overt and covert observations throughout the year. The important part of the process, though, to keep in mind is that once the observation is done, whether it's an overt or covert or it's announced or unannounced, the individual engages with the employee right at that moment so that they can do any immediate correction that needs to be made or reinforce the positive behaviors and actions and decisions that they saw the employee engage in during that observation period. So while something may start out as unannounced or covert, it always ends with an engagement with the employee at the end to ensure that they're getting the learning that needs to take place or the reinforcement for what they've positively demonstrated.
So the focus there is less punitive, it's more behavioral.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tom. Reviewing the statistics we've seen since I've been coming to these safety committee meetings, I mean, it's clear that weather-related circumstances drive a lot of accidents, both in the workforce and among commuters. And I've always found that, the systemization you have in the safety departments here are fairly complete for normal operating circumstances. But when, sorry, Adrian. But when everything goes to hell, everything goes to hell, and people are running around all over everywhere, and I'll speak personally, and one of my flaws as a worker, I wasn't as attentive to blue flag regulations when I was freezing to death outside. I just wanted to get the job finished and get on to something else. But have you adjusted your observation patterns to accommodate the extreme likelihood that you're going to have more accidents in this horrible weather? I understand also these are emergency conditions, and maybe you're pressed onto being on the platform with reflective vests and flashlights, and I know you maybe don't have time to send your people out there in those same circumstances, but do you have a different way of approaching emergency conditions as opposed to routine conditions?
Okay, so within the safety department, whenever there's a service disruption or an emergency situation, while we do indeed staff like the ICC and provide that type of support to operations, we also have our safety officers and our roadway worker field compliance managers go out and engage with employees also, especially just as recently as the storm that we just had. We go out there and make sure that the employees do have the support that they need in order to do their job safely. And again, we provide that immediate correction or access to that resource if they need it at the time that the event is occurring. So it is challenging to balance, but we do recognize how important it is to support our employees in the field, and that's something that we really focus on.
And at New York City Transit, we do as well. If there is a storm or we put in a winter operations plan, my office has a station auditing program, and we do more auditing in that area during that time. With respect to the roadway worker protection audits that I previously mentioned, we do so many of them. We're doing them every night, so it wouldn't matter whether or not it was a winter operation or not.
Anything, we move on to the next item?
So if the next item is number 5 on the agenda, crossing safety assessments, I just wanted to make sure that the Safety Committee was aware that on Monday, the Finance Committee approved a competitive award to CTC Incorporated to do crossing assessments, grade crossing assessments for both railroads, and a staff summary of that appears on page 9 of the book. I just thought since it has important implications for this committee, it would just be appropriate to make sure that you're aware of it, and our anticipation is that that'll be brought before the full board later in the day.
It's an extension of what we started with CTC in terms of doing an assessment of the grade crossings and prioritization in terms of how we should deal with them in priority order. I think since Valhalla, before Valhalla, we had a sensitivity to it that has been raised since Valhalla. This is something that even the FRA just recently went out with a notice on to make sure to reinforce that railroads are doing what they should be doing to assess grade crossings, taking corrective action, and prioritizing them. So I wouldn't say we're a step ahead, but we're a step ahead. So,
Assume that CTC is going to work with the municipalities and the state DOTs and whatever, because a lot of the issues relating to grade crossings, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, at least in the commuter rails, are not operated under our jurisdiction. The roadways that cross and the communities around it and whatever. So I assume CTC is going to engage with them at the various major crossings at least to look at what changes, if any, can be made?
Absolutely. In fact, that's really a CTC strong suit, is the engagement of the local roadway authorities, whether it be New York State DOT, Connecticut DOT, or the local municipalities. In fact, they'll be arriving later today to do some work on west of Hudson crossings on Metro North tomorrow, and they've extended invitations to all of the local roadway authorities to both come out and participate in the field work as well as to review draft recommendations and reports to ensure that sort of everybody is brought along and on board about upgrades that are recommended.
The other thing that has happened, and we've seen it in the railroad meetings, is when the chief gives his report on tickets, or I guess that's the appropriate term, that they give out, the number that they have started giving out for grade crossing violations has significantly increased. Jim, I think that's a fair statement, in both railroads. So CTC might also want to work with MTA police to see where those tickets are being given at what crossings, because obviously MTA police believes that those crossings have become more, what's the word I want, prone to accident because they're there giving out tickets, and therefore somebody is not getting the message that the crossing is, dangerous or whatever, and is doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. So correlating that with where those tickets are being given out, I think would be very helpful also.
That's a great suggestion, and in fact, one of CTC's competencies, in addition to railroad signaling and train control, as well as traffic safety engineering is also, oddly enough, railroad policing, so they're very eager to engage in
Because
that as well.
the problem with grade crossings is, unfortunately, we can only control what we can control. And sometimes we can't control human nature or somebody else to do something that we might look at and say, why did that person do that, in whatever context it happens to be, and knowing or trying to anticipate what they're going to do is sometimes the most difficult thing, but sometimes the most important thing, to try to figure out how do we prevent them or somebody from doing something that we would think would not happen, but clearly does happen, otherwise the MTA police would not be giving them a ticket in that regard. So thank you.
One of the difficulties about living in a regulatory environment, especially where the level of regulations are fairly high and have been in existence with relatively small changes over decades, is organizations, and when I say organizations, whether it be the operator, whether it be the state DOT, or whether it be, some municipality or a jurisdiction that has policing responsibilities, become a little bit, I don't want to say lax, but they think if all those regulations are met, you're doing all you need to do in the way of safety. We've had some people be part of the process here, including some elected officials, that will raise questions when they come out and look at a grade crossing. They go, can't you have a greater level of lighting? Can't you do something in the way of making sure that you're communicating clearly to somebody that something's different here? Something's different in the sense that you have to respond differently at a behavioral level. And I honestly think with grade crossing safety, given the exposure we have at the two railroads, we have to take it to that level.
So our final item is number 6 on the agenda, safety metrics. In January, when we met, we reviewed a little bit about why safety metrics are so important to the management of safety as a business process. We reviewed some main principles of SMS, and we talked a little bit about the processes that the agencies were using to try to determine what metrics we thought were most important for you as the safety committee to focus on. And what I thought we would do today is kind of agency by agency, let the safety leads talk a little bit about how they selected both their performance indicators, what I've been calling lagging indicators, and also their leading indicators, those things that try to be a little bit more proactive rather than retrospective. So I think what we've done is we've built some slides on metrics that is just a little synopsis of what's in the committee book. And I thought we would start with Cheryl Kennedy from New York City Transit, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how transit went through the process of selecting the most important metrics.
Okay. This slide shows the lagging indicators that New York City Transit selected, and we modified our indicators to align them with the FTA Safety Management System approach that David's been discussing with you. We condensed the lagging indicators that we normally report to the Transit and Bus Committee into the 7 most significant indicators which we think will show our safety performance to you. The first one is the subway customer accidents per million customers. And these are claimed accidents to subway customers on the transit system. The next one are mainline subway collisions, mainline subway derailments, subway fires, which are confirmed smoke and fire incidents in the subway system, regional bus collisions per million miles. They are collisions between a bus, another vehicle, an object, a person, or an animal. Regional bus customer accidents per million customers. This is an incident involving a claimed injury to customers occurring while boarding, on board, or alighting the bus. And then the last one is the total lost time employee accidents. And this is a job-related incident that results in the inability of an employee to perform their work duties for at least one working day beyond the day of the incident. So those are the lagging indicators that we selected. We normally report both monthly and 12-month rolling averages to the Bus and Transit Committee, but we believe that the 12-month rolling averages would give you a better perspective of our safety performance than comparing month to month. So that's what we have put in your book, you'll see. The next slide shows our leading indicators that we selected. We'll be reporting on leading indicators that focus on 4 of our higher risk areas of concern. One is roadway worker protection, derailment prevention, station emergency communication, and bus collision prevention. The first leading indicator is the joint track safety audits. These audits are performed by teams that consist of representatives from the Office of System Safety and the Transport Workers Union on a nightly basis, and the teams check to see that our employees are following track safety and flagging procedures while working on the right-of-way. And that was what I mentioned before relative to training. We're going to be reporting on the status of the number conducted against our goal and the compliance rate. This enables us to identify and address problem areas before we have an accident. The second indicator is the status of our continuous welded rail installation program, which will minimize rail joints and help reduce the number of broken rails. A reduction in broken rails will reduce the probability of derailments. So we're reporting the number of track feet completed against our goal. The next indicator is the status of the installation of help points on the station platforms. Help points give the customers the ability to report emergency conditions to New York City Transit personnel so appropriate action can be taken. So we're reporting the number of help points installed against our goal. And this is one item, too, that's reported to the New York State Public Transportation Safety Board at their board meeting. So we thought you should also get that information. The next 3 indicators are aimed at bus collision reduction. The first one is the installation of an audible pedestrian warning system on buses. This system will produce an audible voice alert to alert pedestrians when the bus is making a turn. We're reporting on the number of systems installed against our goal. The next indicator is the installation of a collision avoidance system on buses. This system provides visual and audible alerts to the bus operator to warn of potential forward collisions as well as collisions on both sides of the buses. So once again, we're going to report the number completed against our goal. And the last indicator is the status of our Vision Zero training for bus operators. This is an interactive training program that targets areas such as collision trends, pedestrian and cyclist awareness, intersection approach, left and right-hand turns, weather condition, and distractions. And they use videos and actual collision scenarios which are reviewed and critiqued. And we're going to report on the number of bus operators trained against our goal. So those are the items that we've selected.
Thanks. I don't know if there's any discussion or questions there.
Yeah, I've watched the back and forth regarding bus safety, and I'm somebody that considers, there's a lot of responsible jobs in the MTA, but the bus operator's job, to me, day by day, is the most dangerous, most demanding. I just have a lot of respect for the bus drivers. I know there's been a lot of back and forth in the press regarding responsibility and allegations by many of the employees that there are certain blind spots on the buses that, and there's a blind spot in every vehicle in the world of one type or another, and, they're more severe on some equipment than on others. But I don't notice any measure of I don't know if that means you disregard that. Have you kept statistics on are there more pedestrian contacts where there are on the side of the bus where there are greater blind spot as opposed to the side of the bus which I believe is the right side of the bus? The further you are away from that pillar, I think, is the smaller the blind spot would be. But have you against each other?
We have done a detailed trend analysis looking at all of the pedestrian accidents over a number of years, and the highest probability incident are striking pedestrians while they're crossing the street while the bus is going straight. With that said, I believe David is undertaking a look at the pillar issue, and I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of different activities underway. As Daryl and Ronnie know, We have asked New York City Transit's Office of Strategic Initiatives to build on the work that Cheryl's team has done, thank you, that Cheryl's team has done and take an even deeper dive into these events, although rare. They're certainly something that are very worth studying. Just yesterday, several of us were met with a number of Vision Zero representatives from the city to explore data sources that might be used on top of our own data sources to explore that issue. And another activity that's underway is very actively engaging externally with the bus design community to look at mirror design as well as A-pillar design, and we have some activities underway as well to study that, not really to be reported as metrics, but really as project level work to see how we can drive some improvements with respect to safety there.
Well, none of this is my turf or expertise. I just have an interest in it, and let me ask a sort of structural thing. Now that the railroads have this confidential close call reporting system, have you got some sort of similar, I mean, it's not my turf, TWU would deal with that. Have you tried to institute some sort of similar thing for the bus operators, where the bus operators could confidentially report on particular circumstances on their routes that drove dangerous situations?
All of the agencies have different kinds of programs for reporting. I don't know that any of them are as formal as C3RS, but the Safety Council is discussing very actively the very real likelihood of bringing a more robust program much more widely to MTA employees. So it's in the works. It's a little early to talk in specifics, but we do have some activities underway in that regard.
With some limited structure. And what I mean by that, the program you're talking about in terms of confidential close call is a formalized structure. But the level of awareness that's been focused on Vision Zero, on the issue of what can we do to help a bus operator do his or her job better, as you're seeing bits and pieces of some of the output of that. One is the audible pedestrian warning system pilot. There's technology available now to headlight or head note to the bus operator someone is in an area of the bus operation, limited field of vision of the bus operator, so that they're aware of that. Just in terms of the relationship we have with the city, the TW has identified certain locations and intersections where they felt that traffic engineering improvements needed to be made. In some cases, it's the expansion of an island. Some cases, it's dedicated turning cycle time, things of that nature, eliminating left turns in some intersections. And so it's somewhere between not totally informal, but not totally formal as well. And we probably should set up some type of formal mechanism, because ideally, the bus operators, Daryl's operated a bus, I've operated a bus, real limited period of time. You got to go to that level to be able to ask them what are the hazards they're experiencing. I honestly think over the longer term, I mean, in the last 6 months, I've done more on the surface travel in Manhattan due to a variety of reasons rather than underground. And I'm amazed at certain sections of the city, the level of jaywalking that occurs. I mean, the improvements or changes they've made to the street right out here in narrowing down to one lane has actually, I think, increased tenfold jaywalking. You have people just mid-block, center block, third way into the block, just crossing indiscriminately. And what's amazing to me is they take a step into the street before they look over their shoulder. And that's something we never want to be in a position to blame the victim, but we've got to do something to change behavior and change engineering. But your point's well taken in the sense we probably should set up some kind of formal mechanism on the bus side to elicit those observations from the bus operators, experiences from the bus operators.
And we have a much more formal system on the rail side. We've had a near-miss close call program for a long time. It's not, for probably since early 2000s. It's non-confidential. However, we've targeted specific high-risk incidents that we look at. And for example, last year we investigated 195 incidents. 16 of them rose to the system safety detailed investigation. And we put out 29 recommendations in that area. So we do have a system in place to take a look at near-miss incidents.
Don't get me wrong, I mean, we already have a formal system. We got to call it a grievance procedure. If I was working in a dangerous environment every day, I would encourage the union steward to write a grievance and make it a legal thing, and you have an accident then, some lawyer pulls that out, and and all questions of liability cease.
To your point, we'd like to take it to another level, because we get that.
So the next metrics up are the two FRA-regulated railroads, and we have worked, they have cooperated intensely to try to create a set of metrics that mirror each other for reasons that the two agencies have a lot of commonality. So I think, Justin, are you going to start off with the lagging indicators?
Good morning.
Not that the two railroads are never not common. I mean, it's just, we just try to do that. No, they've done a very good job over the past 10 years to try to get commonality. They really have.
Good morning. The performance indicators on this slide are based on a 12-month rolling average. They compare the current 12 months versus the previous 12 months, and the reason we chose these indicators is because they are industry standard as well as FRA requirements. The first indicator is FRA reportable customer accident rate per million customers, and these incorporate all injuries which require medical attention beyond first aid. The next indicator is FRA reportable employee lost time injury rate per 200,000 manpower hours. Next is grade crossing incidents. This encompasses an impact between on-track equipment and a highway user at a grade crossing. A highway user could include everything from a motorist to a bicyclist. The next indicator is mainline train derailments, and finally, mainline train collisions. I will now turn it over to Lori to discuss our leading indicators.
So on the leading indicator side, as alluded to earlier, we've collaborated very closely to really focus on the things that we have a lot of resource and attention devoted to. On the confidential close call reporting side, both Metro North and Long Island Railroad right now are heavily involved in the implementation. And as we evolve, we anticipate that these metrics will transition to more of an effectiveness of corrective actions, but at this point we're really focusing on the number of reports that we're receiving, the total number of reports that the peer review team is able to review during the time period being reported on, as well as the total reports that meet C3RS program criteria. And just to touch on that, and I know we've kind of talked about it in previous meetings, that NASA provides all reports to both properties that they receive. Some of them don't necessarily meet the C3RS criteria, which are near misses and such, but we want to lose sight of those. So both properties developed mechanisms to ensure that those, so if it's broken concrete on a walkway in a particular shop or yard, that those get funneled to the already existing safety committees. So we don't want to also want to make sure that we're focusing on those metrics here. The total corrective actions being developed that are in progress by the PRT, as well as the total corrective actions implemented. So those are what we're starting with, and I anticipate that these will evolve as both processes go system-wide. Also, based on the severity and frequency of events, felt it was important to focus on grade crossing, and something that Mitch alluded to, Mr. Pally alluded to earlier, really focusing on the 3 E's, engineering, education, and enforcement. So we chose metrics that we felt would help guide us in those 3 areas. Signal Group keeps a very detailed metrics on different things that happen at grade crossing. So broken gates to us is a key indicator that we may need to give some time and attention to a particular location. So we're reporting on the broken gates. From an enforcement standpoint, we're looking at across 3 dimensions. We have the actual number of details, which are or where police, MTA police have stationed themselves at a particular crossing for a period of time to observe the behavior at that crossing. As a result of those details and other events that they engage in, they'll issue either summons or warnings with the idea, again, of preventing things from happening. So when they observe somebody actually violate the grade crossing protection, they'll issue a summons, but they'll also issue summonses for behaviors that they observe at crossings, whether it's somebody on their cell phone or evidencing some kind of other behaviors that would put them at risk of violating the crossing protection. And then finally, we have very robust partnership with the MTA Police. Long Island has had a long-standing, and Metro North is currently implementing community education and outreach. So we'll also be tracking for you the number of participants that we've engaged with, either in a Operation Lifesaver event at a grade crossing or in actual presentations and training programs that occur during community outreach, school presentations, driver's ed programs, and such. So those are the areas that we're reporting on currently, and then we anticipate adding the installation of cameras on our rolling stock as another metric again, another great tool for us to be able to observe what's happening at grade crossings as these devices get installed. So we'll be reporting to you on our implementation of those.
If there are no comments or questions, we can move on to MTA Bridges and Tunnels to talk a little bit about the metrics that have been selected for you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. In keeping up with previous discussants and presenters, we at Bridges and Tunnels will continue to look at some of our well-established performance indicators or lagging indicators that we've used. And in choosing these indicators, we look at whether something is new, something has a greater risk or number of incidents. And when we look at these indicators, which we present on monthly rolling basis at our Bridges and Tunnels Committee meetings, we see that these will continue to tell us how well or how good we are doing. So we will continue to look at some of these indicators, and those are rate of customer collisions per bridge customers or per million vehicles that use our crossings. That is just any collision that happens on our bridges as they cross. Rate of customer collision that involve injuries per million vehicles that cross our bridges. We'll continue to look at rate of employee accident reports. These are any accident reports for compared for 200,000 worker hours. And then we'll look at the rate of employee lost time injuries. These are injuries that produced lost time. And lastly, we'll look at the number of contractor injuries as a result of our capital construction projects on our robust capital projects. When we look at in order to continue to enhance our performance indicators, we believe that some of these leading indicators will be useful tools, and we'll continue to look at some of these categories. But first, we'll continue to look at roadway safety, construction safety, and fire safety, because these are some areas that we think are most important in terms of the number of incidents we've had that we report to you on a monthly basis at the Bridges and Tunnels Committee meetings. So when we look at workforce development, we'll look at a focused safety skills training for all operations maintenance personnel. We continue to perform classes for training for OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 for our workforce operations and maintenance. We look at operations mandatory skills instruction training, such as TIMS, which is Traffic Incidents Management, a part of National Highway Institute. Look at commercial driver licensing, block training, FDNY instructions, arc flash, electric shock prevention, control of hazardous energy, which is affectionately known as lockout, tagout, confined space entry, record driver instructions, and roadway safety rules. When we look at fleet prevention maintenance inspections, we at Bridges and Tunnels operate approximately 500 non-revenue vehicles and equipment, which is maintained on a regular basis, and we perform these maintenance inspections at 4 of our regional facilities or shops. And this is essential service in ensuring reliable and safe fleet with less downtime and longer life cycle. We also have something called safety task audits, which are conducted by joint labor and management committees at each facility throughout the year. This is done on a rotating basis, so every year every facility gets to be inspected or looked at from various angles from the members of labor and also members of our 3 unions. We also look at our safe work plans, which are reviewed by safety and health staff, and this is a necessary component of a safe construction project and specifications that are integrated in our construction projects. These plans include safety organization, job hazard analysis, safe work plans for specific high-risk activities. And one of those specific high-risk activity is hot work permit, which requires our contractors to essentially go through a checklist to ensure that the contractor will perform due diligence before they do any type of activity such as hot work welding or torching on facilities which may cause fire. So the idea is to prevent fires. We will also look at fire code audits, which is required by New York State Uniform Prevention Code. These are conducted by safety and health departments for each of our buildings and each of our facilities. They feature a review of preventive activities and the conditions of firefighting and suppression equipment. In addition, we also have something called Fire Department Liaison with local fire departments, which is an essential component of our safety plan because we bring our local fire departments to our facilities. The use of our facilities makes it necessary and important that the fire departments, which may be called to respond to our facilities or emergencies, are familiar with our layout, with our operations. So we view that as an essential component of our safety program. In addition, we require that our contractors, before a major capital construction project, inform the local agencies, such as fire department, of our activities, the duration, their fire safety plans in order to prevent fires and also fight fires in case they become a problem with the facility. We hope that these indicators that I just mentioned will continue to assist us with our overall objective, which is delivery of safe and efficient services for all of us.
Thank you very much. I noticed you have a nameplate. That was, of course, Pashko Kamaj delivering those remarks. And next is Peter Kohner from Capital Construction.
Good morning, everybody. MTACC on monthly basis delivers a lost time injury rate for 200,000 worker hours, and that's done on a monthly basis. We close it every third week of the following months, and that's based on the Department of Labor rates that we're reporting against. Has, for the last 3 years, developed a statistically driven lagging indicator collection from which we have converted a strategy into a leading indicators. And basically what that means is that we at MTACC provide an oversight audit over the contractor's performance over the three elements of safety, which would be contractor, public, and environmental. These are assured through daily safety walkthroughs, quarterly safety audits with a monthly intermediate results given to the contractor, joint hazard assessment audits that essentially address safe work plans, biannual ACE evaluation that rates the contractor, be it favorable or unfavorable, based on what is given to them monthly, quarterly, and then biannually. We participate in safety monthly meetings and we drive safety monthly meetings with a contractor on each program. The contractor is being given a leading indicator strategy based on our observation, along with their own observation of dailies, that results in training, toolbox talks, site inspections, safe work plan review, audits, new employee orientation, onboarding, and emergency preparedness, where we partner with the first responders on a weekly, monthly basis. And we conduct evacuation procedures that are contractually obligated for the contractor, monthly or quarterly as required. So that's basically our approach to safety from MTACC.
Thank you very much. That concludes each of the many presentations then about our new safety metrics. Did you have a question?
Regarding the relationship between the leading indicators and the performance, not that there has to be one, but in some cases, and I'll pick one out in particular, the installation of Help Point. There's no performance indicator we have that we could see the result of that even in the future at some point that we picked out here. Maybe we should have one, not now, maybe in some time in the future. I don't know. At some point, I suppose Help Point installations will no longer be on the chart because it would have already been completed. I don't know if we want to have a relationship between leading and then performance, but in some cases here there isn't any, and we're installing the Help Point. We put it on as if we're putting them in, but we're not saying what ultimately we expect from that installation. Whether it's we think that people will use it more and feel safer. That's something that might be hard to measure, or how many people just use it. That's Help Point in particular. There's some other things here that
let me walk through that example for you. Okay. We're installing Help Points on platforms and in stations where they no longer existed, where they did not exist. We're doing that because as we migrated away from token booth clerks and a high number of token booths where people knew that's where they go to talk about conditions in the station, whether they be a safety condition, a behavioral condition, or some activity going on that needed to be reported. So right now, the leading indicator is what is the rate of that installation? Are we meeting our schedule? Once they're in, we can track the information with respect to the data we're getting from that. And as you remember with those devices, there's basically two paths. One is the emergency path in the event that there's an emergency on the station. The other is the path you're looking for customer information. So once that program is complete, we've got them installed at all the stations, we can then track the information with respect to what level of information we're getting. So here would be an example of what a leading indicator would be. If we would see an increasing frequency of issues where we had undomiciled or homeless people in a station, that would be an action less safety related. But if it was a case of people entering the trackway on their own to cross over to the other side, and we saw those numbers rising, the lagging indicator would be the number of strikes we had for trespassers on, but the leading indicator would be we've got a behavioral condition we need to take action on, and then we would implement either through the Transit Bureau or in concert with the Transit Bureau and stations personnel actions to head that off from happening. So that's an example of what they were using. So what would be transitional is the issue of tracking the installation. What wouldn't be transitional is once they're in place, what data we're gathering from it. And there are others as well. I mean, in the Metro North example, let's just be specific. We had the Bridgeport derailment. We had a number of actions going on, okay? And they led to incidents operational or incidents where we were striking employees. And yet when you went back and looked at the data, the number of non-completed permanent welds to track was increasing. So the likelihood of a derailment would increase. Hindsight's 20/10, but we should have seen that ahead of time. The other issue is the rising number of near-miss incidents where employees were almost struck. So if you have a leading indicator that captures that information, that's how you take it. And so that's why I think Metro North and the two railroads had track indicators that would be that way.
That's the link between continuously welded rail, right, to get rid of joints, because joints have the potential to cause. No, most of them I see, and some of them don't. But the help point in particular seemed, I intuitively know what we're trying to get at with the help point, and I know the story, but what performance indicator, the question was really what performance indicators are we going to choose to show?
Right now it's installation, but once that's complete, it would be behavior, and what data are we getting from the reports coming through those. And there was an awful lot of dialogue that you weren't part of. I wouldn't even characterize it as healthy tension dialogue, but emotional dialogue on the part of the safety officers and the people. But you go back 20 years, people didn't even talk about leading indicators. They talked about lagging indicators, especially ones that were established. And you don't throw out some lagging indicators because they're good indicators of what your overall performance is. But the awareness of the leading indicator, and some of them, I hate to use the word transitional, but once you get a behavior under control, it may not be the highest profile indicator that you're watching. You come back to it on a regular basis, but a greater distance between each time you make the check, and whatever is the next. For example, the item I raised before is the issue of, it's not trespassers, but jaywalkers. I mean, I think there's been a drastic increase in the amount of that because of things we've done with traffic engineering and these devices in terms of people just nonchalantly jaywalking. And it's a problem. It's a problem we need to deal with. Anybody want to add anything? Susan?
First, let me say that I appreciate this dialogue. It's been helpful to hear how you approach safety and what your thought patterns are. That said, I have a growing concern as I ride our various properties and see the tremendous increase that we have in ridership and in traffic, because the sheer numbers pose a risk to us. And a specific example is Penn Station. There are times at Penn Station where you've had the thoughtfulness to curtail people coming down to the lower platforms because they get so crowded. And I think as moving forward, we have to use that same kind of proactive thinking to dealing with the increase in the number of people and the crowdedness of our system, because it'll be a while. I think, before we have a huge enough system to accommodate everybody. So I appreciate the work you're doing, and think about how to move ahead as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your patience during this evolving metrics exercise. Our intent is that in the operating committee books, if you sit on an operating committee, you'll begin to see tables that look like the ones that were in today's safety committee book. And on those months that we have safety committee meetings, then you'll see a collection of all of the agency's metrics tables, and we'll invite greater discussion during those meetings. Thank you very much.
That concludes the agenda items. If no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Aye. We'll reconvene for the board meeting at 10 a.m.